Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another edition of Broncos Beat. I'm Alexis Perry, joined tonight by James Palmer from the NFL Network, Cecil Lammey from 104.3 The Fan, and making his Broncos Beat debut, the beat writer for the Denver Post, Ryan O'Halloran. Ryan, I cannot believe it has taken us this long to get you on the show.
I'm very selective.
There's a lot of politics involved, Alexis.
Yeah. So I was like, when's the right time? And let's talk. And when it's quarterbacks and cut corners, let's talk.
Let's do that. All right, guys. Well, before we get into some of the recent news out of the UC Health Training Center, first things first, I have to know what the rumor mill is churning out in terms of which veteran quarterback might find his way to Denver before this offseason is over. So as we take a look at the three guys who Cecil wrote about for the DenverFan.com last week, Nick Foles, Russell Wilson, and Dak Prescott are three veteran quarterbacks who the Broncos loved in the past who might actually be available to them now. So let's break this down a little bit, starting with Foles. Is he someone who you would target as a plug and play day one starter, or do you think he's someone whose greatest contribution to this team would be to just push and compete with Drew Lock?
Yeah, what can the Broncos get, and what do they really want to do? Now, what I would do is do everything you can for Deshaun Watson. But that being aside, I looked at some of the quarterbacks that, might be available. I think it's a little bit ridiculous for Prescott and Wilson, but we'll discuss those anyway. I know they really loved Nick Foles, scouted him personally at a game at CU where he threw 3 interceptions, by the way, and is a player that you could bring in and kind of push Drew Lock. Is that what they want to do? Because the greatest disservice this team did to Drew Lock, in my opinion, was adding Jeff Driscoll last year, because he didn't do anything for you. He didn't do anything to push Drew Lock. So if you're a Drew Lock apologist saying he just needs more time and just be patient, he's going to take a third-year leap like Josh Allen, which means he would be an MVP candidate, by the way. I want everyone to realize that. Then you would look at Foles as potentially an option. But, and this one is for you, James, it's all about fit.
There it is.
Foles under center? No, he's an RPO guy. He's a guy that you bring in as a backup off the bench, and he can win a few games. That's the best role for Nick Foles. You bring in Nick Foles, it's a sign that, they're giving Drew Lock another chance.
Hey, everybody would like Drew Lock, Cecil, to make that jump to that MVP race like Josh Allen did in year 3. Here's what I know about the quarterback situation in Denver right now. The guys like Carson Wentz and that group of caliber quarterbacks, they're not interested. They are interested in potentially maybe bringing a veteran to come in and, as Cecil says, push Drew Lock. There's a lot more love for Drew Lock in that building than some people think maybe after they made an offer for Matthew Stafford. I don't think they're really in play for very many terms of veteran quarterbacks. I think the one part that does come in play, guys, is Drew Lock has to show us he can stay healthy for 16 games. I think last year we would have really liked to see someone like Jameis Winston come out there and play those games that he's missing, as opposed to what the Broncos were putting out there. Now, they are somewhat interested in, say, Deshaun Watson or how things operate there, as Cecil and I dream about Deshaun Watson playing for the Denver Broncos. But Ryan, in terms of any veteran coming in, whether it's Andy Dalton, Jacoby Brissett, or, one of those type of guys, I think that's more of a realistic possibility for the Denver Broncos than, say, a guy like Nick Foles.
Yeah, I agree. A couple weeks ago, I thought it was going to be Stafford or Lock. Stafford's not in the picture anymore. I do think, and I agree with you, Drew Lock has a lot of support in that building. I think the question is, when is he going to get there? And what's the contingency plan? The Driscoll move, awful. But with a guy like Foles, maybe Mitch Trubisky, you mentioned Andy Dalton, I think it's got to be a guy who is okay not being in a camp competition, but is experienced enough where if on Thursday of game week, Drew Lock turns an ankle, this guy's going to be able to come in and run the game plan that Pat Shurmur has drawn up. So, if I had to put a couple bucks on the table right now, I still think the favorite is Drew Lock in week 1. But the Watson stuff, the Russell Wilson stuff is all sort of wild cards right now.
Well, speaking of Russell Wilson, franchise quarterbacks are now taking a page out of the NBA's book, and they're running the shots a little bit. Russell Wilson, he was a little bit more vocal last week than ever. And I know it's a pretty far-fetched idea that Wilson will be traded, but if so, are we talking a Deshaun Watson-sized trade basket here, or what would you suspect that trade would actually look like?
whatever it takes with Wilson. And I applaud all of these real franchise quarterbacks because, listen, there's 32 owners. It's a very exclusive club. There's like 5 or 10 real franchise quarterbacks. And if you can do this and say, hey, I want to be involved more in personnel. Hey, maybe I want to be traded. Like, that's the power that you have. Your career isn't that long unless you're Tom Brady in the NFL at that position. So with Wilson, it's give up whatever you can for the guy. And I applaud it. As we all know, everyone here knows, like, the NFL is slow to change. They probably don't like this with the players having that kind of power, but those QBs, guys like Russell Wilson, they do.
I don't think Dwayne Brown really likes what's happening right now. That left tackle for Russell Wilson, him going out there everywhere, Cecil, and talking about how he's getting hit too much. He doesn't like what's happening on the offensive side of the ball. Well, what? He wanted more say in personnel. He's gotten that and what they've done at the offensive coordinator. He had a say in that. This appears, from what I'm hearing, to be something more or less like a guy that is looking to leave the franchise. Maybe this doesn't happen, in my opinion, doesn't happen this year, but maybe next year or the following years. 3 years left on his contract. This looks like someone that's trying to put the feelers out there, sell a little bit of his cologne at the same time while he makes these appearances. But also, Ryan, make sure that everybody knows, hey, guys, in a year or two, I might like to make myself available.
Everything he says is calculated. This wasn't Aaron Rodgers a half hour after the game being emotional. I think Wilson was sort of setting the table, as James said, that, you know, for his next stop, either immediately or after next season.
Guys, Wilson's edge has always been his ability to extend plays, but we've seen the Broncos struggle mightily in scramble drills. So with that said, does he make sense here in Denver, or do the Broncos need more of a traditional pocket passer, Ryan?
Well, I think with a guy like Wilson, you take what he is. But I think also if you have a conversation with him, and if I'm the Seahawks, I talk about it at the same time. Extending plays are great, but it's also opened you up to a lot of punishment and a lot of those sacks. Granted, the offensive line in Seattle has been a debacle, but if you're Wilson, you say the Bronco offensive line played pretty well, knew how to protect a mobile quarterback, and they have a lot of skill talent that if they don't give up in a trade will make him effective.
All right, guys, we all know that Jerry Jones is excited about this hot quarterback trade market, but it does seem like Dak Prescott's camp and the Cowboys may still be a little far apart. James, what do you know about that?
Let's make sure we go back, Alexis, and remember how Dak Prescott was playing before his foot went backwards.
Yep.
I mean, this was absolutely a remarkable performance this season of what Dak Prescott was doing at the quarterback spot. Obviously, they are a ways away. You have to look at a couple of contracts. The Patrick Mahomes deal is an outlier for the rest of the sport. I mean, that is not a comparable contract with anything else that is going on in the NFL. They've already tagged him once. So if they tag him again, he's walking. I do think a long-term deal is eventually something that is going to happen, but there's so many things that have to come into play with where the cap is going to be moving forward this year. That's slowing down some things with the Broncos as well. But I do think Dak Prescott is in that small group, as Cecil mentioned, that have power at the quarterback spot. I think that part of it, though, is going to be an interesting aspect to take a look at, because Dak does know he has a little bit of power, and he's seeing what Deshaun Watson is doing. He's seeing what Russell Wilson is doing. That might complicate matters there a little bit. I don't see him playing really anywhere else next season, though.
Really quick, speaking of power, does Denver need to be more concerned with Dak's rehab process than most teams, given Pat Shurmur's system, those power boot wrinkles that the Broncos run?
Yeah, I think you need to watch it closely. But if you can get a guy like Dak again, and there's an alternate reality. There's an alternate reality where Dak Prescott's already their quarterback. I remember watching him at the Senior Bowl. There's your Broncos Beat bingo.
Yeah.
And he looked like a perfect Gary Kubiak quarterback. I had a late first-round grade on him. They loved him. They probably would have taken him at 31 had he not missed a flight to Denver for his private workout and then fell to the 4th round. So I like to think of alternate dimensions where Dak Prescott is their quarterback. So do whatever you can if you can.
All right, guys, coming up after the break, George Paton made his first move as general manager last week. We'll discuss what AJ Bouye's release means for the Denver Broncos after the break. Welcome back to Broncos Beat. Alexis Perry here alongside Ryan O'Halloran, Cecil Lammey, and James Palmer. Guys, last Wednesday, Broncos GM George Paton released veteran cornerback AJ Bouye, who played in just 7 games in 2020. Ryan, you mentioned in your piece for the Denver Post that this may turn out to be one of George Paton's easiest decisions. So why do you think it was so easy for Paton to cut ties with Bouye?
Yeah, a couple of factors. Salary. production, durability. He had a high salary, he had no production, he had no durability. So they create $12+ million of cap space. And you mentioned the 7 games. AJ really couldn't get out of the blocks this season. He had a shoulder injury in week 1, then a concussion, then a suspension. But it puts the Broncos in the same spot they were last offseason, is they need a lot of help at corner. But this was the right move, and it came at the right time. Just get it over with.
It did, and it's something where last year when they traded for AJ Bouye, maybe another player we can talk about later, like you looked at their contracts and said, hey, if it works out, you know, that's great. They've got him under contract. And if it doesn't, there's no dead money remaining. So this was kind of a visionary move. You wanted it to work out. You thought maybe it could. Vic Fangio liked him years ago. Well, it didn't. So you move on.
Yeah, moving on was the right play here. And I think, Ryan, it's only going to start as some sort of effect that we're going to see on that side of the ball, right? We're going to see things now start trickling throughout that side of the ball to where they got to make some changes, free up some more money, because you have to find a way to sign Justin Simmons long-term in this offseason. And then you start to find other ways to fill other pieces. And I think Cecil's right. When you try to fill pieces but don't end up with dead money, that's a positive. But at the same time, you now are back in the same spot where you're trying to fill the same pieces.
Yeah, and right now, because they're old and expensive and banged up on defense. So, you know, Jarrell Casey, I think that's another easy call. That's no dead money. Von Miller, I think it's an easy call to move on from him. I'll probably be met with some resistance on that, even though it does have some dead money. But one thing, if I'm George Paton, is you look at, okay, a 4th-round pick for AJ last year, maybe I try and flip one of those 7s or one of your 6th-round picks to another team to get a veteran corner before free agency starts, where the cap's going to go down and the market may not be what you want it to be to go get a veteran.
Who are some of those veteran corners that you could see this team potentially looking at here, Brian?
Well, I'll give 2 names that have connections to George Paton. Xavier Rhodes in Indianapolis sort of rebuilt his market this year for the Colts, and then Mackenzie Alexander for Cincinnati. The Vikings with Paton drafted both those guys. They signed Rhodes to a 2nd contract, and you look at the corners. Do you want to get a guy who can play every snap, or do you want a guy who can specialize and maybe won't cost as much? Mike Hilton, I think, is the best blitzing nickel in the league. Yeah, you have Bryce Callahan, but you can't really count on Bryce to make it through a whole season. So the thing at corner right now is they have a ton of options, but I think the key for the Broncos is get 1 or 2 guys before the draft, so you're not in a corner, pun intended, a corner, and have to take one at 9. You can take some options.
Well, see if Rhodes can bounce back, James. I got to jump in because I love Xavier Rhodes. I loved him when he came at FSU.
I don't know why I talked.
And he's a guy that, as Ryan said, he rebuilt things with the Colts. So can he stay healthy? That's 1, because that's where his career went off track. And then 2, can he continue regaining that confidence? And in this system, I think it's very important to point out how, well, you're playing zone dog. All right. You don't need shutdown corners. You can take an older guy who's trying to get things back on track and make it work, James.
I got my Broncos beat all the way bingo filled out now that I heard zone dog. That was the last one that I was looking for at the bottom corner, and now I got it filled out. Listen, when you talk to coaches and general managers around the league, they're going to tell you every year there's so many teams that what do? They draft corners and they draft tackles. Why? It's so hard to find good corners and good tackles, so everybody keeps swinging. I think you're going to see them try to build this group up through the draft. Obviously, they could take somebody at 9, but all the free agents talk we're having as well, to me, I would like to bring in a free agent corner that has won previously. I think that is a big thing that matters on a defense now, as Ryan kicks Von Miller out the door, is not going to have anybody from that Super Bowl 50 team playing over there that knows about winning. So what about Bashaud Breeland from Kansas City? Or I think, Ryan, you did mention Darby, right? He won a Super Bowl with the Eagles. What about guys that have won in the past that could bring a little bit of a swagger, a little bit of a winning mentality? You combine that on the cheaper side, hopefully, along with the draft, because you're going to need to find a lot of different ways, Alexis, to fill the holes that you have at cornerback. I think the thing that does help is Kareem Jackson, Justin Simmons, one of the better safety duos in football, helps that out. And Kareem being a veteran corner in his past also helps out bringing up some of these younger guys as well.
Cecil mentioned the zone principles of Vic Fangio. This team, if I'm Vic, I sort of look at my scheme a little bit when I'm addressing corner and say they have to get more hands on the football. This team did not create any turnovers last year. And one thing Vic and Ed Donatel said a lot was they're making changes at corner because guys aren't contesting routes. Well, you can't get be afraid to get beat deep in this league because it's going to happen. So find some guys who have some past breakups and interceptions on their resume. And to James's point about veterans, I throw Patrick Peterson out there from Arizona. Is he willing to pick up sticks and go to a new team this late in his career? Maybe, but maybe the Broncos can make it worth his financial while by saying, I know we haven't been winning lately, but here's a lot of money.
I was just going to bring up Patrick Peterson because I know Broncos country is kind of looking at him, hoping that he could be the guy here in Denver next season. But speaking of the guys who are on this team, on the current depth chart, who do you guys see as someone who really needs to step up in 2021?
It's Michael Ojemudia. That's who it is. You had high hopes for the kid when you drafted him last year. He got benched. His tackling was poor. I don't know how you get better at tackling when you don't play because you don't practice tackling because you don't tackle in practice. But it's Ojemudia. He's the one player that the Broncos need to elevate to at least be a solid number 2. I don't know if he can do that, but they really need him to do that.
Well, still to come on Broncos Beat, one of the many decisions George Paton needs to make next, what to do with restricted free agents, including fan favorite Phillip Lindsay. These guys will share their 2 cents on the other side of the break. Thanks for sticking with us for this final segment of Broncos Beat. Guys, like we talked about in the last block, George Paton has a lot of big decisions to make this offseason, including what to do with the homegrown guy, Phillip Lindsay, who is a restricted free agent this offseason. 2020 was a tough year for Phillip Lindsay, who just couldn't stay healthy. But Cecil, if the Broncos were to place an original round tender on Phil, what kind of market do you think is out there for him?
I think it's going to be larger than some people think, right? You think, original round tender him, you'll get him back, it'll be fine. He's coming off a down year. Not so fast. There's plenty of teams that liked him when he came out of college, that liked him at the Shrine game, that still like him today, according to the people that I talked to. So the Broncos had better be careful, or you might lose Phillip Lindsay. Now, I want Phillip Lindsay to be featured. I talked to him this week on the show. Like, he's a guy that's chomping at the bit to get back out there to be a 1,000-yard rusher again and to also be used more as a receiver. Quite frankly, it was insulting for him to get like 10 targets on the year, whatever, 7 times, whatever. It was a horrible number. Like, pass this guy the ball, use him the right way, use him in space, and he can be a dangerous weapon, whether that's here or somewhere else.
I like that you said weapons, Cecil, because that's what everybody's looking for in the NFL, right? You want to get away a little bit, teams, from that just traditional running back. How can I use this guy as a weapon? And I think he has that skill set when he's in space to be a weapon. I'm curious how much the wrist did play a factor in how he caught the football this past year with him coming back from that injury, and did that affect him at all? I'm with Cecil. I've talked to him multiple times where he'll look you dead in the eye and stare you down and be like, why can't people think I can catch the football? Like, he gets so angry about it. And I think he wants to be used in these couple different manners. But at the same time, you have to use him with, I mentioned the skill set, but with his body size in the proper manner. But Cecil's also right. There is a bigger market than people think because of how he came into the league, because of how he became successful. That is a desired personality and work ethic within a lot of teams' locker rooms.
Well, I would not tender him, and I don't think he will be back. And just listening to his interview with Cecil the other night, that sounded like an audio resume to me, to other teams, saying, this is what I've done, this is what my health is, and this was what I can do.
He was pulling a Russell, Ryan? He's pulling Russell Wilson?
Yeah, Phillip is smart. He's aware of all those tactical decisions. And, Bronco fans may not want to hear that, but I could see George Paton just totally starting over at running back, cutting Gordon, letting Phillip walk, and then using a draft pick and signing a free agent.
And remember, you can move on from Gordon with no dead money because of the suspension, Alexis. So that is a move that they can make clearly and not financially be hit by it.
Well, we have to talk about wide receiver Tim Patrick, who proved his value when Courtland Sutton went down. Do you guys see Tim Patrick as a member of this team come week 1, or do you feel like there's enough talent in that young wide receiver room to part ways with them?
You need a guy like Tim Patrick because you have Pat Shurmur in the 3-vert system. So you basically have to have like 6 guys ready to go. And he's your direct backup to Courtland Sutton. So, I don't know where Ryan's going to come down on it. It's cutting Vaughn and cutting Phil. But okay, please keep Timmy Pats, Ryan, please.
Yes, I would tender him. I would not sign him to a multi-year deal for 2 reasons. 1, he is your Courtland Sutton insurance. And 2, Tyree Cleveland has a lot of support in the building. Maybe not this year as a prominent role, but I think he's going to start working his way into that.
James, on the defensive side of the ball, Alexander Johnson, he's the big RFA this year. We saw in the Super Bowl just how important the inside linebacker position is. So is Johnson the guy for the Broncos here in 2021?
I don't know. It was a nice story. I'll say that. I think it was a nice story, but I just think getting more athletic at the linebacker spot. You mentioned the Super Bowl, as I spent my life in Tampa, sadly, most of this season watching athletes play the middle linebacker spot that can go sideline to sideline, and just made all the difference in covering Travis Kelce and changing that game. That position needs to get more athletic for the Denver Broncos.
Okay, so just to recap, we have Phillip Lindsay gone, we have Tim Patrick here, and then Alexander Johnson gone, correct?
Sure.
Is that what you guys think?
Sounds about right.
I'll say they tender AJ at an undrafted level, and because he can be, at very least, he can run down the field on special teams, but maybe he's a 2-down backer. Ideally, I think you want him off the field in passing situations.
Exactly.
All right, guys, that is all the time we have for this week's edition of Broncos Beat. As always, we'll see you same time, same place next Monday.